How's it going, YouTube? Today we're going to go over some of the brand new previews from the Brothers War. Now, I'm not going to go over all the previews because I can't go through all of them. I just don't have that kind of bandwidth right now. But I'm going to go through the stuff that interests me the most in a few different varied formats. Alright, we're going to try a little different thing here. This time I split my screen so I can view the cards directly from Scryfall. So let's see what we got here. First up, I have Gix, Yawgmoth Praetor. For 1 black, you have a Phyrexian Praetor, which is a 3/3, that says whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may pay 1 life, and if they do, draw a card. It also has pay 4 and triple black, discard X cards. Exile the top X cards of a target opponent's library. You may play lands and cast spells from the cards exiled this way without paying their mana costs. So this has actually got a really good thing going for it. It's kind of like a pseudo Idrik, the green and blue elf, that when they attack your opponents, their controllers draw cards. Well, in this case, they get to pay life into it, so it's like a black version of that. And as you fill up your hand, you have more things to discard into the plus or the 7 CMC ability on it to start stealing stuff from them. So it really goes into the theme here with the decks. Next up, we have Teferi Temporal Pilgrim. For 3 blue, you get a Teferi Planeswalker, 4 starting loyalty, that gains its loyalty abilities when you draw a card. That's pretty good. Imagine like doing a cast of a Wheel of Fortune or a Windfall for 7 plus cards, and all of a sudden you put 7 or more loyalty counters on this thing. That's pretty nuts. It also has a 0 of draw a card, which is essentially +1 draw a card. And then you have a -2 that creates a 2/2 blue spirit token with vigilance, and whenever you draw a card, you put a counter on the creature. So essentially, you're making yourself a version of the snake that gets counters. And then -12, target opponent chooses 1 permanent they control and returns it to its owner's hand, and then they shuffle each non-land permanent they control into their library. So essentially, you board clear everything they have and make them shuffle it back into their deck. So they may not even have it back before the game's over with. This is just a punishing card. Next up, we have Mishra, Tamer of Makbawa. For 3 black-red, you get a 4/4 human artificer that says permanents you control have ward, sacrifice a permanent. That's pretty damn harsh. And then each artifact card in your graveyard has Unearth for a 1, a black, and a red. Unearth means you can just bring it back from your graveyard for a turn, and at the end of the turn you sacrifice it and it gets exiled, or if it gets blinked it gets exiled, or if it gets destroyed it gets exiled. So pretty straightforward. The big thing here is the ward, sacrifice a permanent, because you're playing black-red. You're going to be destroying creatures. You're going to be destroying some of their other stuff too. So as you're blowing up their creatures and you flop this down, they're going to be short on permanents to destroy or sacrifice to be able to target your stuff as you go along. So that's pretty good. The Unearth's actually pretty good too, because if you just need like a combo piece out of your graveyard to unearth on the cheap, you just do this and go to town. It's really good. And then the counterpart to that card, Urza, Prince of Krug. For 2 white and a blue, we have a Human Artificer 2/3. Artifact creatures you control get +2/+2. There's an enchantment that does this very same thing. I think it was from one of the new Phyrexia type sets years ago. And it also has pay 6, create a token copy that's a copy of a target artifact you control, except for it's a 1/1 soldier in addition to its other types. So any kind of artifact that you might have, you can create a copy of with this. So let's say you have a copy of, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something off the top of my head here that's really, really busted with this kind of thing. Let's try one of the artifacts that gives you +1/+0, like the banner. I have to put it into the screen later. But you just make 1/1 copies of that thing, and every copy gives you +1/+0. So as your stuff grows outward, you can increase that count and just make your stuff bigger and bigger and bigger. There's other things you can do with this, but just off the top of my head, buffing your creatures with a bunch of 1/1 pseudo lords that are copies of those artifacts is really good. Next up, we have Transmogrant's Crown. For 2 colorless, you get an artifact equipment that equips for either 2 colorless or a black mana. The equipped creature gets +2/+0, and when it dies, draw a card. So This is templated very similarly to Skull Clamp. Skull Clamp gave +1/-1, and whenever the creature died, you drew the card, and it only equipped for 1. So this is kind of like a fixed version of Skull Clamp. But in the right deck, especially in Commander where you have access to more cards, this thing is probably just as busted as Skull Clamp. You can just equip it, on the cheap and just keep on trucking through. Next up, we have Tawnos the Toymaker for 3, a green, and a blue. You get a 3/5 Human Artificer that says whenever you cast a beast or a bird creature spell, you may copy it, except for the copy is an artifact in addition to its other types, and the copy is a token. Now, green and artificers don't usually go together, especially in older levels of Magic where this world is set. But Tawnos, before he met Urza, was big into artifice that was based around nature, especially snakes and birds. And in the picture, if you look in the background, you see a mechanical snake kind of rearing up, and he's working on a bird head design. And that snake design is actually what impressed Urza to take him on as an apprentice. So it's kind of nice to have that art as a reference here. Now, this could be decent. Most birds either land in blue or white. Beasts mostly land in red and green. So, depending on how you dig through the annals of time here, you could find some pretty good beasts and birds to kind of make like a clone type deck. And in Commander, you have access to things like Doubling Season, you have things like Parallel Lives, things that double those tokens up. And this could actually spiral out of control if you build the deck quite right. Tokasia's Welcome for 2 and a white, you get an enchantment that says whenever one or more creatures with a mana value 3 or less enter the battlefield under your control, draw a card. This ability only triggers once a turn. We already have Welcoming Vampire, which is a 2/3 flyer for 3 that does pretty much the exact same thing. But being that this is an enchantment, this is a lot harder to get rid of. I can see this possibly seeing play in some kind of white aggro that maybe you don't want to chance the vampire dying, so you'll play this instead. Or maybe you play a little of both. Maybe you play 2 and 2 in standard. This also makes really good if you have like a low to the ground white whatever deck in Commander. So I could see this card seeing some play. Hurkyl's Final Meditation for 4 triple blue. It says, as long as it's not your turn, this spell costs 3 more to cast, so it would actually cost you 7 triple blue on somebody else's turn. And it says, return all non-land permanents to their owner's hand, end the turn. Now, that means anything that's going on, if there's spells on the stack, if there's effects being activated from whatever, if there's a pile of storm triggers on the stack, whatever's going on, this just immediately exiles all of it. It's gone. It just removes it from the game and the turn ends. Pretty powerful effect, but that's a lot of mana to cast that into. I don't see this seeing any type of play in standard or modern or anything like that. It just costs way too much. Commander, I could definitely see this thing seeing some play, and it's kind of interesting. I could, like a Spell Slinger type deck, this could be used as a secondary copy of Cyclonic Rift. Next up, we have the Stone Brain. For 2 colorless, you get a legendary artifact that says 2 tap and exile the Stone Brain. Choose a card name. Target opponent. You get to search their graveyard, their hand, and their library for up to 4 cards with the same name that you named and exile them from the game. That player shuffles and then draws a card for each card exiled from their hand this way. Activate only as a sorcery. In Commander, this is not likely going to see much, if any, play. Jester's Cap is probably a better card in Commander if you're going for removing specific things from somebody's deck, because you don't have to name a card, you just search for 3 random cards and rip them out of the deck. But in 60 card formats, this thing is going to be really good. It gives you access to a removal ability in any deck. You can it's going to see sideboard play, probably in Modern, even Pioneer. I could see this card seeing play in those formats, because if you know what your opponent is playing and you know what their linchpin cards are, You just name them and rip them right out of the deck. They're gone, and they can't use them again the rest of that game. Next up, I have Bitter Reunion. For 1 and a red, you get an enchantment that says when it enters the battlefield, discard a card and draw 2 cards. And then you pay a colorless and sack it. Creatures you control gain haste until end of turn. I like impulse draw cards in red. We've had them for a long time now. Most of them are either instants like Thrill of Discovery, or there's the one with I forget the name of it off the top of my head right now, but it's a sorcery speed, 1 and a red, do the same thing as this. But the nice part here is you don't have to do it. It's a may discard, but it's the same as the sorcery speed version of the card where you just discard a card, draw 2 cards, and then this sits there waiting for you to load your board up, and then you can just be like, oh, I create a bunch of tokens, pay an extra 1, sack it, now they all have haste, swing at you for lethal. This is probably going to see play in place of or in addition to those impulse draw cards. Next up is Drafna, founder of LatAm. For 1 and a blue, you get a Human Artificer Advisor. It's a 2/1 that is got the ability of 1 and a blue, return target artifact you control to its owner's hand, and then 3 and tap, copy target artifact spell you control. That means you're copying the spell as it's on the stack and creating a copy of it. So what's nice here is you can play out your early artifacts to get your board rolling along, play him, and then bounce one of those things back to your hand for 1 and a blue, recast it, and then you can copy it with the 3 and a tap ability to get double the benefit out of said artifacts, whether they're mana rocks, whether they're artifacts that have static effects, whatever's going on, you can actually just roll in with copies and stuff like that. And then if you're playing with anything with like a green or a white tilt where you have access to duplicating tokens as you make them, you get more and more of them as you go. Next up is Yoshin Dissident. For a green and a white, you get a 1/1 Human Artificer that says whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. We've seen similar type cards like this with enchantments, where you play an enchantment, you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, or you play it and you can put an enchantment and you put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature. We see that kind of stuff all the time. This is one of the first times I've seen it with an artifact theme. And the cool part here is we have so many ways of making treasure tokens now, and clue tokens, and blood tokens, and then the brand new Power Stone tokens. So if all of a sudden you're making like a burst of 3 to 5 little artifact tokens, all of a sudden you're like, here, let's dump a bunch of counters over here and a bunch over here. Your stuff's going to get big really fast. If you spread it around, you just kind of bulk out your army before they can do anything about it. And this thing is going to probably see quite a bit of play in several formats. I can't wait to see if I can make it work in Standard and in Commander. This guy, Harbin, Vanguard Aviator. For a white and a blue, you get a 3/2 Human Soldier with flying that says whenever you attack with 5 or more soldiers, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain flying until end of turn. Hello, Soldier Tribal. This is your Commander if you're playing it in Commander, and it is going to see play probably in Standard as well, because there actually is a good amount of soldiers in Standard right now to build a soldier-themed deck. You build up a bunch of little tokens and little dorks on the board, and you just swing and you can punch through, because there's not a ton of flying in any format, really. I mean, you get, your one big dragon here and there and that kind of thing. But, I mean, you just turn all your little flying threats, and then you get a temporary lord effect on top of that, and then you have other soldier lords available, especially in Commander. This is going to see some play, and I love this design. Hall of Tagasin. It's just a land. Taps for a colorless. It also has 1 and a tap to filter any mana into it to create a different color. And then 4 and tap, create a tap Power Stone token. Not overly exciting, but if you have a deck that cares about artifacts, it's decent. You can pay 4 and tap those Power Stones. And the nice part is, as you build up Power Stones, the Power Stones you're creating can actually pay the 4 or pay into the 1 to filter out the colorless, because it just says you can't spend that mana to cast a non-artifact spell. It doesn't say anything about activated abilities on other things. So you can use that mana to activate this land and keep making Power Stones. The Temporal Anchor for 3 triple blue. You get a legendary artifact that says at the beginning of your upkeep, scry 2, and whenever you choose to put one or more cards on the bottom of your library while scrying, exile that many cards from the bottom of your library. During your turn, you may play cards exiled with the Temporal Anchor. So, in other words, beginning of your upkeep, you scry 2. You choose to either put them on top to draw naturally, because maybe they're too expensive to cast this turn, but you still want to keep the cards, or you put them to the bottom because you want to cast them for free, because what you'll do is then you'll scry to the bottom, the trigger goes on the stack, you'll exile those cards, and until the end of your turn, you can go ahead and cast them. Also works with things like opt, like, okay, I'm going to opt, scry, put it on the bottom, exile it, and then have the ability to cast a spell off of that, as well as still drawing the card off the opt. Pretty damn good. I can see this seeing quite a bit of play, especially in Commander. I don't know that it's going to see play outside of that, but it's still a really good card. Hajar Loyal Bodyguard. For a red and a green, you get a 3/3 human soldier. That's a really good rate. A 2 casting 3/3. Hello. And it has the ability sacrifice Hajar Loyal Bodyguard. Legendary creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain indestructible until end of turn. So this has a couple of different applications. First, obviously, you can protect your legendary creatures from dying. So we already have like legendary matters type decks in Commander, Historic Brawl, and that kind of thing, thanks to Joda. But you can also do kind of a Bard class deck in either Historic, or I think Pioneer might even have something along those lines as well, where you could just play this in there, and if you have Bard class leveled up to level 2, this thing's free. You just plop it down, boom, done. And then you can protect all your other legendary stuff. And it also has the application of being an aggro type thing where you can swing at your opponents, hit, and then if they don't block or whatever, you can just be like, surprise, sack this, and all your army gets +1/+0, and you can kill them out of nowhere, or kill their creatures if they block a way that you can benefit from doing this. We also have Calamity's Wake. This thing is lighting up Twitter right now. People are like freaking out about this uncommon. For 1 and a white, you get an instant that says exile all graveyards. Players can't cast non-creature spells this turn. Exile Calamity's Wake. So this can be used a few different ways. First off, if you just need to get rid of somebody who's comboing off out of their graveyard, it doesn't matter what format it's in, you just cast this and nuke their graveyard, because if they don't have a counterspell, their graveyard shenanigans are done. On top of that, you can lock them out. Like you have a huge board, and basically if they can't clear your board, you win. All you gotta do is go, during your upkeep, play this. You can't wipe the board the rest of the turn. That's it. There's no Wrath of God, no Damnation, none of that. You can't do it. And then you exile the card. Doesn't matter. You've done what you needed to do here with this. So this works out really well. On top of that, if you play it, you can also force your opponent, like if you need to resolve something, you can cast this, and if they don't counter this, they can't counter what you're going to do next. That's pretty powerful. Repair and Recharge. For 3 white, you get a sorcery that says return target artifact, enchantment, or planeswalker card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Create a tapped Power Stone token. It's not often that we get a resurrection spell that doesn't care about creatures, but in this case cares about artifacts, enchantments, and planeswalkers. I don't even know of any off the top of my head, other than Blood on the Snow, that'll allow us to get a planeswalker straight out of the graveyard and slam it back on the battlefield. Enchantments, you don't see that very often, where you get to just return it straight from the graveyard too. There's a few things that do mess around with artifact stuff, but yeah, you don't see this very often. I don't think you're going to see this in Standard or anything like that, but this is probably going to see some play in Commander. We also have Corrupt. For 5 and a black. Corrupt deals damage to any target equal to the number of swamps you control. You gain life equal to the damage dealt this way. I put this in my list of interests because mono black, black red, and all those variants that have been running around in Standard as of late are pretty popular. And years ago, aging myself here a little bit, during the Onslaught era and Torment and Odyssey and all those cards, Mono Black Control was a huge thing, and this card was one of the ways that deck finished you off. You would build up all these swamps, you'd keep the board cleared of everything, and then you would just launch a huge Corrupt at their face, and you would copy it with a Mirari to do double the damage. Luckily, we don't have a Mirari available for them to copy this stuff, but this bears watching, especially in those formats, like Standard, like Pioneer, and those kind of things, because there could be a Mono Black Control deck that could use Corrupt to start blasting people. And I know that any format where the Mirari is legal, or you have a way to copy the spells, you could even play this with like Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth in a multicolored deck, turn all your lands into swamps, and then use like blue and red spell copying abilities and launch this off at somebody as well. So I like this card. I'm going to keep an eye on it and see what happens. Here we have the brand new version of Swords to Plowshares called Lay Down Arms. For a white, you get a sorcery that says exile target creature with mana value less than or equal to the number of planes you control. Its controller gains 3 life. I don't see this getting a lot of play outside of a mono white deck for a couple of reasons. Right now, the mana bases in Standard are mostly lands that are not basic land type. You got the pain or the pain lands where you tap them, they deal damage to you to make a color. You also have the slow lands where you have to have 3 or more lands in play before it comes into play untapped. And then the rest of its basics. Well, those lands don't count towards your planes count, so it's gonna mess with the math on trying to be able to exile something out in a multicolored deck. So I'm not sure this is going to see much play in Standard. It might see a little bit for like low to the ground creatures, but you're not going to hit any big stuff with this. Not consistently anyways. In Commander, you might see it in a white heavy deck. It's kind of hard to tell. Because again, same rules apply here. In formats where you don't have dual lands with typing attached to them, like the shock lands, it's hard to judge how well these things are going to do. So, and again, there's better removal spells available in these other formats than this. Brotherhood's End. For 1 red, you get a sorcery that says choose one. It either deals 3 damage to each creature in Planeswalker, or you destroy all artifacts with mana value 3 or less. This thing is going to see some play in any kind of red-based deck, regardless of format for the most part. You do board sweeps. I mean, Anger of the Gods is a thing in older formats. It was good back when it was in Standard. It's probably really good now in the current format now. But the cool thing here is the fact that it can destroy artifacts. This set's heavy on the Power Stones, and treasures are a big thing. Blood tokens are still a thing. Clues are a thing. All these things get eaten alive by that second mode. And somebody's like depending on that mana, and they're depending on all this stuff to just do whatever they're going to do. You can just blast it out of the way and it's gone. So I really think this is a good card. I would keep an eye on this one. Going with Harbin earlier, we have Fortified Beachhead. As it enters the battlefield, you can reveal a soldier card from your hand, and it enters the battlefield tapped unless you reveal a soldier card this way, or if you already control one on the battlefield. It taps for a blue or a white, and it has 5 tapped. Soldiers you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So they're really pushing the soldier tribal theme here. If a tribal deck emerges in Standard with this blue-white combination, or blue-white-red, or whatever combination there's going to be, this card is likely going to be attached to that deck. It's also maybe going to go really well in Commander decks that are soldier based. I'm thinking like a Bant soldier deck with green attached to it. I'm not sure yet. I'm brewing in the back of my head. But this card's going to see some play, and anything that might be templated after this design is probably also going to see play. The last card that they've previewed as of this video that I've got a lot of interest in is Siege Veteran. For 2 and a white, you get a 2/2 human soldier that says at the beginning of your combat, you can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, and whenever a non-token soldier you control dies, create a 1/1 soldier artifact creature token. So This is Luminarch Aspirant Junior. It costs 1 more mana, so that's different, but it has a little bit bigger body to start with. It's a 2/2 that you can turn into a 3/3. So essentially, if you have nothing else, it's a 3/3 for 3. Not pretty good rate, you know? But the bonus of keeping your other soldiers alive in a soldier tribal deck, that's pretty dang good. This card is likely going to see play because Luminarch Aspirant was a very powerful card, and this is almost like a fixed version of that card. So what did you guys think? Did you agree with some of the stuff I've said here in this video? Please let me know in the comments below. And as always, have a great day. Have fun with the spoilers, and I'm going to try to put some more out here in the next couple of days as more interesting things catch my attention.